Serious. People that have experienced hallucinations, auditory or visual. What was the scariest thing you heard, saw? I was in alcohol withdrawal, cowering in my room, sweating through my sheets, skin flaky and eyes bloodshot, pissing brown, covered in bruises. Every noise was like a bomb going off. I kept thinking my father in the next room was pounding on the door, rattling the knob, while screaming the cruelest things in a progressively more demonic, distorted voice. There was music coming through the bathroom fan, a few-second loop of a song I can't stand anymore. People down on the street screaming up at me, threatening to kill me. Sensations of hands pressing down on my body and tongues in my ear, on my neck. Every so often my dad really would come to the door, making me jump out of my skin and ask if I needed to go to hospital. I insisted I could stay home because I needed to remember what it felt like so I didn't relapse. I was so terrified of him in those hours. I truly couldn't differentiate between what my sick brain was producing and the reality around me. And unfortunately, I can't look at my poor father the same. It was hellish. Sober 6 months on September 2nd. I went through a few weeks of having brief hallucinations upon waking up. They were usually small, like thinking that I saw one of my cats in my room or that I heard my roommate calling me from outside when that wasn't happening. But one morning I woke up and a full astronaut complete with mirrored helmet was standing next to my bed looking at me. That jolted me awake and it was gone. And it was apparently a strong enough jolt to reset whatever was causing the issue, as I never had another hypnopompic hallucination after that. I'm schizoaffective, depressive type, and the scariest was one night during a psychotic episode. I woke up in the middle of the night. My husband was asleep. I went into the living room and sat on the couch. I then saw a man sitting at a table not far away. It was a combined dining area and living room. I knew if I moved from the couch, he would kill me. To try to scare me off the couch, he put roaches on the floor and couch, and some got on my legs. I just sat there and cried until hubby woke up and saved me. Back when I was writing my thesis, I tried the experiment, which was popular at the time, of rather doing 20 minutes power naps at regular intervals, typically 4 or 6 hours, instead of having a full night's regular sleep. No, this was not for the thesis, but rather to maximize the time I had. By the end of the 5th day, I was clearly hearing someone behind my back, alternating between calling my name in despair and screaming as if she was being tortured, as well as I could sense people walking around me, despite being alone at 4 a.m. in the library. My son has schizoaffective disorder. The worst one he's had was his own reflection turning and looking at him, and making a mean face. That sucked. Was a very seasoned psychedelics user, and always had great experiences. So I convinced myself that I could keep pushing the boundaries of reason further and further. Ate an irresponsible amount of mushrooms and very brilliantly chased it with an equally absurd amount of ketamine. Proceeded to act like a total lunatic at an outdoor festival, so my girlfriend, justifiably, broke up with me on the spot. Someone mercifully drove me home immediately, and as I sat alone in my dark house, the entire floor of my living room opened up into a spiraling black vortex to hell, and about 1 billion baseball-sized black spiders came pouring out and covering every inch of the house. Had to just ride it out for hours. Didn't touch any psychedelics for like 15 years after that. This was on salvia, not exactly your standard hallucinogen at all, but perpetually being wrapped into some kind of a carpet to be recycled in a loop that felt like it went on for years. Thinking that this was how it was always going to be like this. And it was my fault. That was less than pleasant. What's the creepiest encounter you've had in broad daylight? I was in a pilot truck stop and noticed a driver muttering to himself and ogling the pilot workers. I paid for my stuff and walked out. I walked to my car, settled myself, and heard commotion from the store. A woman ran out screaming, "He's killing them!" I called 911, just as the driver, covered in blood up to his elbows, staggered out. Opened up a car door of this woman parked up front, dragged her out, and stabbed her multiple times before wandering around the lot. A guy in an SUV drove into him a couple of times, but the dude got up and continued limping around with the knife. Then the cops arrived. Cops ordered him to drop the knife, then shot him dead. He killed 4 people that morning. I slept over at a friend's house after a Halloween party when I was 16. We had a fair amount to drink. Woke up the next day. Was waiting for my cab on the road right outside where he stayed, hungover, just minding my own business. when a white van with windows pulls up next to me. A middle-aged woman, well-dressed, very soft-spoken, rolls down the window and starts talking to me. The conversation went something like this. "Hi there, how are you today?" "Hi, I'm good. We're looking for young, handsome men like yourself to join our group. Are you busy right now?" She wasn't flirting. She wasn't wearing anything revealing. Her calling me young and handsome sounded like something your grandma would say. "No, thank you. I'm busy and going home." "Are you sure? You should reconsider. We really need you." It was at that moment that I glanced into the back seat, trying to see whether anyone was with her in the van. There was a person in the back. I focused my eyes on that person and realized what I saw. It was a woman who looked 75, 80 years old. She was dead. My blood ran cold. I realized the situation that I was in. I didn't say anything else, just walked back to where I came from and hid behind a building waiting for them to leave. They stayed for 15 minutes. She didn't come out of the van. She didn't call out for me. She just sat there waiting. When I was around 9, a random woman came up to me, shook me around, and screamed that every problem in the world was my fault. Had a woman offered to buy me from my parents. The silver Tic Tac, the thing the FA-18 Super Hornet recorded in 2004 that you can now see on YouTube. It was in 2010 over Olympia, or at least from my vantage point. That's what it looked like. I was in a boat on Henderson Bay with my parents. We saw this silvery, ovalish thing flying about at incredible speeds. One second it'd be over the city, the next it'd be by the Olympics. It did this, dancing back and forward, juking and jigging, and then finally just pausing on a dime over the city. It then went vertical and just vanished. To get an idea of the movement, imagine someone flicking a laser pointer across a wall. Those erratic, crazy movements. It was like that. Now imagine you're holding a powerful flashlight in a dark night. You shine it against the forest tree line before flicking your wrist upwards, off into the night sky. That's how it looked as it shot upwards into God knows where. The thing that unnerved my dad was the fact that it was silent. He's a retired engineer and said that we should be hearing sonic booms at the speeds the thing was moving at. The way it flashed between the city and the Olympics was unreal. It was broad daylight, no clouds. Then years later, I see what looks like the same thing from that Hornet footage. I don't know what we saw, but it broke the laws of physics as I understand them. Super unnerving, to say the least. What horrible thing happened to you as a kid, and you didn't realize the severity of it until you got older? Our babysitter died while she was watching us when my twin and I were 3. We had no concept of death and tried to wake her up. She had spilled water when she fell, and I still remember getting a dish towel to wipe it up, thinking she would be proud of how responsible I was being. I remember going to get our little toy pots and pans to bang together to make noise to wake her up. We had no idea what a heart attack was. Mom took me along when she was buying drugs. Took me 30 years to realize waiting at a gas station at 6 a.m. on a Saturday wasn't a thing, and neither was driving way into the ghetto and having a friend drive around the block with us. Turns out not everyone sleeps on their laundry and goes right to bed when they get home every day either. It took me almost 25 years to realize that alcoholic parents aren't normal, and other people have it different. Having a cluttered house and needing to spend a few hours carrying everything from the living room into my bedroom to make the living room appropriate for guests. I would sob and beg for it not to go into my room because I knew it would never leave, and the living room would get filled again with TJ Maxx bags and garbage we don't need. Turned out a hoarded house isn't normal, and it made me a pretty awful roommate to my friends in my teen years. I was 4 years old, and my nighttime routine was always telling my mom and dad how much I loved them. One night, I couldn't find my mom to tell her goodnight. I searched everywhere in the house, backyard, etc. Finally, 4-year-old me goes out the front door, looks around and sees a person standing in the middle of a crowded street with cars zooming by and swerving around them. I started walking down the sidewalk to get a better look because I thought it was the weirdest thing. Turns out it was my mom. But what was weird is she wasn't answering to my calls. I started getting really scared because my mom was blind, and had only gone blind in the past several months. I ran back to the house and got Dad because I was too afraid to go in the street to get her. It wasn't until many years later that I realized I had witnessed my mom attempting suicide via getting hit by a car. She was severely depressed due to having gone blind at the age of 34 with 2 small kids. Makes me sad to think about sometimes. She's better now, but still unfortunately blind. Adopted, stepdad punished me by forcing me to watch them shoot my dog. I was told he was going to do it about 10 hours beforehand, and he made me dig a hole out in our pasture. Evening comes and he drags her out there, absolutely oblivious as to what is going to happen. He threatened to shoot me when I refused to go out there with him, so what could I do? I tried looking away, but he told me I'd have to watch or I'd get it too. So he held his rifle up to her head and pulled the trigger once, then a second time after she hit the ground. I then spent the next hour pulling her body into the hole I had dug and buried her. She was a Great Dane, just over a year old. I was 11. Parents got the dog, but then passed the responsibility of her on to me because they were too busy to take care of her. I'm 17 now, but that shit still fucks me up. I got out of there a few years ago and was shocked that nobody else could relate to what I went through. Edit. This all occurred about 6 years ago. I appreciate the kind comments I have received. I always thought it was my fault and that I should have done differently. I do not live with them or near them anymore. I live with my grandparents who are disgusted by how I was treated. The teacher not letting me use the toilets in elementary school and peeing my pants under the desk, then getting yelled at by same teacher. I lived in the countryside in a farming town. Alongside the road my family lived on was a small concrete ditch. It was visible for about half the road and then went underground the rest of the road until it flowed out into a large canal at the end. I was a really thin and small kid. When I was about 9 or so, my sister and I and some of her friends were playing in the small ditch to cool off. My sister thought it would be interesting to see if I could fit into the pipe that led underground. So my 12-year-old sister and her friends held me by my arms and lowered me into the pipe until my hips were in. I could feel the rushing water pulling me in. I yelled at them to bring me back out. They did, and then we left. I didn't tell anyone about it for years, and when I finally did, they looked horrified. So, yeah, if my sister had lost her grip, I would have gone underground and likely gotten stuck and drowned. What's the scariest experience you've had in your life so far? Korean Airlines, KAL, in 1982 into Seoul from Tokyo. They'd served fish, and then the plane was a roller coaster. Horrible, violent turbulence that lasted until we landed. Plates and trays were falling, and people vomiting throughout the plane, including the guy behind me and a woman in front of me. By far the absolute worst flight of my life. The smell of fish and regurgitated fish was overwhelming. Took my full mental effort to keep my stomach down. The stewardesses looked like they were about to be sick as they swapped out the air sickness bags and collected the trays while the plane was jumping in all directions. I was seated over the wing, and when we touched down, the plane was tilted, and I saw the wing scrape the ground for quite some distance. Could feel the plane turning in that direction, and I was sure we were about to crash, but the pilot managed to finally straighten it. The lineup at customs looked like a zombie movie. I nearly froze to death in an ice cream freezer in a grocery store one early morning, and to this day, I suspect my lunatic supervisor hated me so much that he put me on ice cream duty knowing full well that the door was broken and traps people inside. At 8 a.m., no one could hear my bang and scream at the door because there were few workers and their path didn't take them anywhere near the ice cream freezer. Stupid me forgot to charge my phone before work, and my phone was dead. Not that it matters. There is no cell service inside those thick metal walls. God only knows what would have happened if I wasn't able to smash the door open at long last. My supervisor only ever checked on me once per shift. I quit that very same day. I've been through some shit, but I'm going to say watching my husband, in his 30s, have a stroke was the worst fear of my life. He'd had a headache for about a week, and it kept getting worse. One day it was so bad that he'd gone home for the day. He was on the computer when I took my lunch break, and he said, "I've taken all the meds I can, I'm going to have to lay down." The kids were at school, so I encouraged him to get rest while he could. Well, I got the feeling that I should go home and not run errands after work. I got home about 2:45 and laid next to him. He rolls over and his arm kind of flops on my boob. I rolled over to tell him not to get fresh with me, and he was trying to make eye contact. I said, "Honey, I don't like the way your eyes look. Are you feeling any better?" Without saying a word, he lumbers to the bathroom and looks in the mirror, so I follow. but you could tell he wasn't making sense of what he was seeing. I asked, "What's the matter?" He said, "IDK, I'm going to sit down." And that's when I asked, "Do you want me to call you an ambulance?" He said, "I don't know." Then asked, "Do my eyes look funny to you?" He looked at me, and his one eye was pointing straight towards the wall. So I called 911. Since my husband is a big dude, there was no way I could move him, but he was able to make it to the living room chair. The response time was amazing because the ambulance team got there within minutes. But he'd lost coherent speech in his right side by then. He had another stroke at the hospital and one in the ambulance on the way to the transferring hospital. He was lucky to make it at all, but he's almost made a full recovery. Some years ago, I caught whooping cough. Really unpleasant disease overall, and I recommend against getting it. Symptoms apparently peak shortly after catching the disease and then gradually diminish over the course of several months. At one point around the symptom peak, I woke up in the morning, tried to take a normal, awake breath. It just didn't work. For all my effort to breathe, I got only the tiniest trickle of air. It felt like my trachea was closed down to something like 1% of its normal capacity. I stumbled out of my bedroom, seeking help, wondering on some level how many seconds I had before I lost consciousness, and whether anyone could even do anything fast enough to save me. I couldn't breathe out fast enough to get more air in, and couldn't breathe in fast enough to get the old air out. Talking was out of the question. Across a few more desperate, wheezing attempts to breathe, I wondered if it was the end of me, so suddenly and helplessly like that. Then something dislodged inside, and I went through a massive coughing fit that finally let some fresh air into my lungs. Thankfully, it never happened again. But for weeks, I was afraid it might, and to some degree, I still am. Being unable to breathe is evidently among the most terrifying experiences a human can have. In some sense, we spend our entire lives a couple of minutes from death, resetting the timer with every breath. And I feel like on that day, I got a bit too close to the end of the timer. I tripped on 7G of mushrooms and saw my own funeral. Then later on, during that same trip, saw the inside of myself and it looked all decayed and withered. I legitimately thought I'd already died, even though I was able to walk over to my best friend in the next room and talk to him. It showed a lot about how I've been treating myself/my body, and that I need to straighten up if I want to continue living. I had an aneurysm at 15. I was sitting in the car on the way home from school, and suddenly, I couldn't see and I felt like my head was being crushed, only 1,000 times worse. I don't remember much besides the pain, but my dad said I just slumped over and started screaming and screaming. I woke up 2 days later with my head shaved, unable to speak clearly or walk at all. It took me 3 years to completely recover. I was home alone while my parents were on a trip. One late night, I heard a car pull in. I looked out the window. The car was in my driveway. 2 guys came out with masks and crowbars and looked like they were going to break in. All the lights were off in the house, so they must have thought that no one was home. My window was open and I knocked something over, which made a noise. The 2 guys looked up, ran to their car and drove off. I'm not sure if they were going to rob my house or my neighbors, but that was scary.